69 days until the NFL draft kicks off, and instead of focusing on draft process, prospects, possibilities, more drama from one Jets drive, where yet another report has emerged, a quite scathing report ripping the Jets, ripping Joe Douglas, ripping Robert Saleh, ripping Jaime Elhai, who most Jets fans are probably not all that familiar with. So we'll talk a little bit about him. We'll might touch on some draft talk, but this is going to be aimed mostly at this report from Tony Pauline. Listen, we have all these websites that track data and stats and key points, whether it's a PFF site, whether it's what is it, over the cap with the cabinet. There's a website for everything. If you're an NFL fan to track data, I would love a site. I'm not smart enough. I don't have the time to do it, and I'm not smart enough to do it. I want a site that pulls together all of the reports and the stories from behind the scenes and predictions and projections. Because my guess is that more often than not, these people are guessing, um, and just kind of throwing stuff out there because you got to stay relevant. You got to get clicks. You got to pay the bills. I understand. Um, this is right off the heels of the Diana Rossini, Zach Rosenblatt story, which I talked about. To me, that story was a little more credible because that was stuff we knew. I see people talking about this Tony Pauline story. Um, this is nothing we didn't know already. Saying the same exact things they said about the Zach and Diana Rossini report. Not entirely true. The Zach and Diana Rossini report, as I discussed, we knew tidbits. All of it was credible, believable because we saw real world examples of what they were claiming. We saw it playing out. We heard the coaches acknowledge these things before the report came out. So that was all sort of very believable. Tony Pauline, what he's done, he's put together this story claiming people in the building are talking to him. But there's at least one thing that jumped out at me is like, wait a minute. If he really had sources in the building, he wouldn't have said that. So basically, the gist of it is that the Jets are a mess. Woody Johnson sat in on the player exit interviews, which isn't standard practice. And when Woody spoke up, Joe Douglas backed off. He paints Joe Douglas basically in this story as a kind of a beta male, sits back and just takes orders and doesn't want to hurt anyone's feelings. He suggests that Robert Saleh is the guy, that Joe Douglas is just doing what Saleh wants. That could be an exaggeration. I mean, it's the job of the GM and the head coach to work together. We complained for years, with Rex and Idzik, and we've had situations where you feel like the GM and the head coach aren't on the same page, and how are you going to build a winner if they can't agree on what they need to win? So if Joe Douglas is deferring to Robert Saleh, saying, "Tell me what you need, and I'll find a player who can do it," to me, that's not really a situation where he's just letting Saleh run the show. Um, as far as Woody being in on these interviews, I don't know what else you do in that spot. I mean, I don't know if any GM's in the position to turn around and tell the owner to shut up and get out of the room, because then that guy won't have a job anymore. So I think the Joe Douglas stuff, and listen, I'm not here to say one way or the other if it's true, it's feasible. Listen, I've said before, I've said with the first Joe Douglas draft class, I would imagine Adam Gase, who was the head coach at that point, I would imagine he had a lot of say in that class because he got Douglas the job. They had a history, they were friends. Gase told the Jets to hire Douglas. I could see them, being in a situation where Douglas was more willing to bring in guys, or just to work with Gase, to work well with Gase. I mean, come to think, of course, the draft right before Douglas would have been Gase and McCagnon, which was a complete disaster. Um, but anyway, Douglas, Gase, all that aside, what Tony Pauline is saying is that Joe Douglas is just sitting back, taking orders, and not really having the command you would expect a GM to have. And we've talked about this recently because of the Aaron Rodgers situation, right? We've talked about how Douglas was in some ways hamstrung because he tried to do what Woody wanted him to do, or what Aaron wanted him to do, which was get his players, get his friends, get his buddies in here. Joe Douglas. Now, listen, we don't know if that's exactly what he was told to do, but he's taking orders from somebody, and Joe Douglas brought in a bunch of bad football players. Again, it baffles me. There are people I've encountered people who think that that was 100% Joe Douglas. That Joe Douglas wanted Randall Cobb. I'm not buying that for a second. I'm not buying for 1 second that Joe Douglas wanted to pay Dalvin Cook, $6, 7, $8 million. Not a chance. So we know that Douglas, or if you have any common sense, you can figure out that Joe Douglas was bringing in players for Aaron Rodgers to get him his guys. So you've got that. Now you've got this report saying he's bringing in whoever Robert Saleh tells him. And this was the hole in the story for me. Was Tony Pauline saying that the Jets didn't take Jackson Smith and Jigba, a player like that. And he was that was my number one guy. I wrote the article before the draft saying Jackson Smith and Jigba to the Jets is a no-brainer. Perfect fit with Aaron Rodgers, immediate impact receiver. That didn't happen. But Pauline suggests that Njigba could have been the guy if not for the fact that Saleh was calling the shots, which is why the Jets went with an edge rusher in the first round. But Rich Cimini, who I would trust Rich Cimini a million times out of a million times over Tony Pauline. Cimini's plugged into the team. Tony Pauline, I'm not so sure. And Cimini said a few weeks ago, Jackson Smith and Jigba, the Jets didn't like him. They didn't even have him as a first round pick. So I'm not buying that part of it. Jim says, amazing how the McDonald pick has become a tipping point, strongly indicating incompetence. Yeah, listen, the McDonald pick, I've said it a million times. I said it after the draft. We talked about it on our show. Myself and Chris Schubert were sort of 100% on the same page saying, what the hell are the Jets doing here? You just traded for Aaron Rodgers. You've got Super Bowl aspirations, and you drafted a guy who's not going to play with your first round pick. That did smack of incompetence. It was so shocking, and it's still looking back. It's unbelievable. You drafted a bench player with your first round pick in a year where you have Super Bowl aspirations and plenty of holes. You had a lot that had to do. Thunder says the Jets organization let Rodgers run the team. That's why the Packers got rid of him. Rodgers doesn't know everything, especially when it comes to player evaluation. I think the Packers really got rid of Rodgers because they felt Jordan Love was ready. And they didn't want him to, they wanted to keep him happy. So either way, why ever the Pack got rid of Rodgers, that's kind of irrelevant at this point. The fact is he's a Jet, and Joe Douglas went a little too much out of his way to give Aaron Rodgers everything he wanted. And now we're hearing that Joe Douglas is going out of his way to give, to get Woody Johnson, or to fill the orders he's given from Woody, or Woody again sitting on these meetings. Dylan says he'll never forget our faces when they picked him. I was in shock. We both were. I thought, wow, good player, but really, like, this is what you're doing with your first round pick? And he played even less than I thought. I thought, God, this guy might play 25, 30% of the snaps. He didn't even hit that mark. He fell far from it. So it really was, in a sense of, for a win now team, that was a throwaway pick. It could pay off in future, and I've said this before. I think it will pay off in future years. I think he will be a very good player. But I think that pick at that point to do that, it didn't make any sense at all. And if we're hearing, if we're supposed to believe that was Robert Saleh chiming in saying, "Get me my guy." Listen, this is a big year for Joe Douglas. I think, one thing Pauline glosses over, and I've talked about this before, the draft history. Fans and some pundits like Tony Pauline kind of write anybody off who's not a high level starter, or like, you can draft developmental guys, you can draft role players, you can draft backups. Those guys can be solid draft picks in the middle late rounds. Like, if you just draft a guy who can hang around and play in the league and contribute in late, in the middle late rounds, those aren't bad picks. I know everyone wants the fantasy players and they want the highlight reel guys, and it's like, well, outside of these 5 guys, nobody he drafted is good. It's just not the case. It's just that they're not everyone is Sauce Gardner, not everyone is Garrett Wilson, not everyone is Joe Tippmann, not everyone is Michael Carter. Like some of these guys are just good players. We've talked about this a million times. We don't know what Ashton Davis is going to do next season. Is he going to be a Jet? We're not sure, but we know that last year was by far his best year as a pro. So it's like, all right, did the light come on? Did it? Is he now at least a starter level player, like a mid level starter or backup? Which again isn't what you want for where you drafted him, but he's still an asset. Bryce Hall, we've talked about whether or not he stays around. He played great in the one game he was called on. If you keep him around as a solid backup, as a fifth round pick, that's not a bad pick. But everybody people just want to hear about the superstars and the big time guys. Not everybody is that. Most guys aren't. So to write off something, Jamie and Sherwood I've talked about, he's another guy who's come on. I think that he could be a guy they end up grooming to take Mosley's spot when he moves on. So we'll see what happens with that. But the other aspect of the story where Tony Pauline really went in, he went after Jaime Elhai, team president Jaime Elhai, probably the most derogatory, scathing, whatever you want to call it, commentary was on Jaime, saying basically Woody and Chris Johnson hired their coffee boy. They hired a friend as the team president and not somebody to actually, tell them no when they needed to be told no or to stand up for them. Now, Jaime Elhai is an interesting figure. Not somebody we talk about a great deal because he's not. We don't know how deep into the football decisions he is. But I can say this: before Jaime Elhai was the team president, um, I think it was the year before he got named team president. I was still living in the States. Excuse me. I covered Jets camp out at Florham Park. Jaime Elhai was on the sideline one day walking past, and somebody just they asked me. They said, "Do you know who that guy is?" I said, "No, no, no, I'd never heard his name before that day." And they said, "That's Jaime." I said, "Who's Jaime?" And they said he's. It was a very non-specific answer. The answer was kind of Woody and Chris love him, like he's their guy. No one really knows what his job is, but he's always here. He's always around. Um, if you go back and remember the disastrous nightmare press conference with John Idzik, right? If you listen closely enough, you can hear somebody. I forget who it was, and I'm not even going to guess because I don't want to get it wrong. It was a reporter. While all these questions were being screamed at John Idzik, there was one reporter you could hear screaming, "What does Jaime Elhai do? What is Jaime Elhai's role in the organization?" Basically saying, we all see this guy here every day. He's on the sidelines. He's always with Woody and Chris, like a confidant who has full access to the team, but no real meaningful job title. It was kind of like he was walking around as if he was the team president, but he wasn't the team president. And then the Jets, of course, let go of Neil Glatt and they give Jaime Elhai the job. And the only time we've seen Jaime Elhai's name really is when the Jets have gone on these big fishing, expeditions to land big fish free agents. He flew out to California for the Aaron Rodgers thing. I forget who the player was before that. There was another big acquisition a few years ago, the year he got the job, that Jaime Elhai was flying out to for negotiations. And the team kind of put out a comment, or they asked the media to let it be known that Jaime wasn't an X's and O's guy. He was there more in a business capacity, which kind of makes you think money. And that's why I've said in the past, I brought this up a few weeks ago on the Play Like a Jet mailbag with Scott Mason and said, look, I think that Jaime might be the guy who's controlling the purse strings, when they're not spending on a backup quarterback and things like this. So whatever his role is as the team president, what's being said now is that, I mean, he is what I was told he was. He's a guy that Chris and Woody really like. So they've given him this job, and now he doesn't really do a whole lot. Jamie, I guess, yeah, Jaime is a marketing guy. Yeah, and he's a part of decisions that really he shouldn't like. It should be the football people flying out to see Aaron Rodgers. And you saw if you don't know who Jaime Elhai is, Look at the press conference when the Jets introduced Rodgers, and you get Woody on one side, Chris on the other, and Joe Douglas is there, and then you see Joe Douglas step back and he grabs Jaime Elhai and pulls him in. Like, you get to be a bigger deal for this picture than me because you're the team president. You're Chris and Woody's best friend. So they don't have another football guy in the building, although that should be Joe Douglas. To me, Joe Douglas shouldn't need a team president to tell him what to do. If that's the case, just make that guy the GM. So not a great look for Joe Douglas. Not a good look at all for the Jets front office behind the scenes. The talk is that it's Saleh again. Robert Saleh is a guy that, and this, I mean, this we do know. Robert Saleh isn't great with, like, he says a lot of things in front of the microphone that if you're paying attention, it's not true. And the number of times I've gone at it with people who are like, "Oh, we know this is true because Saleh said it," and I'm like, "Really? Like, that's you think the things he says?" I mean, I don't think he's the bad guy. I don't think Joe Douglas is bad. I like Joe Douglas a lot more than I like Saleh. Like, Joe Douglas has done some things that you expect out of a GM. You look at the talent here. Daniel Jeremiah just a couple days ago put out a story. How close our teams, how many blue chip prospects, how many high level prospects does each team in the AFC East have? And the Jets have like five. When was the last time the Jets had five blue chip players? And the only reason AVT isn't a blue chip guy is because the injuries. The Jets would legitimately be sitting there with six blue chip players on their roster. Like, those are like foundational guys that you build a team around. And that's what Joe Douglas has managed to put together. Yes, there are still some holes, but if you just, as I said, you look at Joe Tippmann, you look at Michael Carter, one of the best nickels in the league, a guy in Tippmann who was one of the best rookie centers or rookie offensive linemen this year. And then, of course, you have the monster class with Garrett and Brees and Sauce and JJ and those guys. Last year's class, obviously, I mentioned Tippmann. We'll see what happens with Carter Warren. Um, yeah, and that's what I was just talking about, Dylan. Not and Dylan, feel free to hop in. I didn't know you were around tonight. I would have said let's jump on this together, but feel free to call in or join in. But it's all Daniel Jeremiah's evaluation of the Jets roster, and they had more blue. I mean, I don't think the Patriots had one. The Dolphins, I think, had three, and the Jets had five or six. Like I said, blue chip prospects and it would have been more if had AVT been healthy. So we'll see where he goes this year. I've talked about that before. I think that this is going to be a situation where the Jets let him decide, or at least they're going to his whatever he wants is going to weigh very heavily in their decision. If he says I want to play guard, I don't see them going too bad. We're moving you to tackle. If he says I want to play guard, they might try to talk him into it. They might say, well, here's why we think tackle would be a better option, and maybe he goes for it. But I think ultimately they're going to let him decide where he plays next year. So not a great day, but again, take it with somewhat of a grain of salt. Believable stuff, but Tony Pauline, not the best batting average. And that's the problem with social media today is that any person, be it a blogger, be it a writer, be it a news reporter, a on camera, off camera guy, whoever, former players, anybody can put anything they want out there. And some people do, and it gets you followers. I've seen people grow accounts like out of nowhere, and you're reading and you're like, oh, this person's, no idea who this person is, and they're claiming they've got Joe Douglas on speed dial. And people fall for it. So why not do it, right? That's sort of the mentality for some folks, and more power to them. What's this? What it shows that Sal's another clown who thinks defense wins championships. Um, well, listen, we just saw the Chiefs have a really hard time winning a Super Bowl because the 49ers defense. I think you still got to have a defense. I get that every rule in the game is geared toward offense and they want points. They want as many points as possible. They want it to be like the Arena League. They want 75, 73 every week. But you still have to be able to slow teams down at some point. You have to be able to get that big stop. And I think that the Jets, I feel kind of the way I did about the Jets last year. If Rodgers comes back healthy, do they need to hit on a couple of picks? Certainly. But if you've got Tippmann coming back, and I get it's a big if AVT stays healthy, Carter Warren, we saw Damian Woody. We've talked about this. Damian Woody said he thought Carter Warren looked good enough to be a guy who earns consideration for a starting job. I agree there. And as Woody and people have said for years, like year 1 to 2 tends to be the biggest leap, the most improvement a guy shows. So if Carter Warren improves significantly, you might have a starting tackle in Warren, a guard in AVT, a center in Tippmann. Who knows what they're going to do with Ladainian or with um Lake and Tomlinson, still Ladainian Tomlinson. And then you got to get another tackle. It will all fall to the Jets. Do you get Fashanu? Do you grab someone who can truly play left tackle? Um, but that you're basically a left tackle and a couple of guys staying healthy away from having a decent O line. And we know Aaron Rodgers, right? Give him a decent O line, that's enough. He doesn't need all the time in the world. And then you add a weapon to Garrett Wilson. That's why, listen, I'm not going to get into the Brock Bowers thing again. But Garrett Wilson, get a receiver on the other side of him, get Tyler Conklin a little bit more involved, get Jeremy Ruckert a lot more involved, Brees Hall healthy for a full season with a repaired O line. I think this team can do some special things. The reason I don't think they will, at the end of the day, the question the Jets have to ask themselves is, or Jets fans really, the question Jets fans should be asking is Aaron Rodgers at his age, coming off of this injury, a good enough quarterback to overcome Nate Hackett, Robert Saleh, Keith Carter, um, and find a way to get this team into the playoffs and a deep playoff run? I don't know if he's good enough to do it all himself. I just you can put a lot on a guy, but you can't surround him with nothing. With like the void, like there's just a great void where there should be leadership. Um, and I get that Aaron Rodgers has been around the block a few times. He can handle a lot of the stuff on his own. But I'd feel a hell of a lot better if they had a head coach who was a quality head coach or an OC who was a proven guy. They don't have any of that. Like Aaron Rodgers is from a leadership standpoint or from a mentorship, like it's just him. He's not going to learn. What do you think Robert Saleh is going to teach Aaron Rodgers about, playing offense? What do you think Nate Hackett? I mean, these guys are not fit for purpose. So I just don't see the Jets overcoming it. Tomlinson is trash, but JD will keep him. That's going to be an interesting thing. I'm not so sold. I was sold on that earlier in the offseason, but the more you look at Tomlinson and how bad he was, you might be able to find an equal or better player for less money. In which case, I think you let him go. All these stories get me nervous that free agents may not want to come to this supposedly dysfunctional organization. I don't disagree, Aaron. I think what's going to happen, and we've talked about this before. I think the Jets are going to either have to grossly overpay for top tier guys, or overpay a little bit for the mid and lower tier guys where there's very little excuse me, where there's very little competition. So it's going to be those second, third wave guys who aren't getting a lot of calls. The Jets will be able to bring guys like that in. But if you're a high end free agent, a high level guy who's going to command a lot of money, and you're going to have 6, 7, 8 teams, blowing up your phone, why would you come to the Jets right now? I mean, honestly, I'm a Jets fan, so I'm like, yeah, hell yeah. But really, I mean, these guys aren't fans. They're employees, right? Whatever it is you do for a living, whoever you are listening to this, whatever you do, imagine there's 10 other companies that would hire you to do the job you do now. And how likely would it be that you would go to a company where your manager was on the verge of getting fired, his boss is on the verge of getting fired, the owner of the company has a reputation as not being the best guy to work for, the companies in the media making headlines for being dysfunctional mess? You wouldn't even consider it. You'd be like, you know what? I got 9 other companies that are looking at me, and none of them are getting this bad press. So unless you're gonna offer me 20, 30% more than the other company, I'm not coming to work for you. And so I think that's the spot that Aaron, it's a 1,000,000% legitimate concern to have. Aaron Rodgers might be, listen, maybe again, on the one hand, we're mad that Aaron Rodgers is allowed to make call the shots, but at the end of the day, he might be the one thing that can lure players here. And I'm not even sure that's the case. Um, I know he's got some controversial views. I don't care about them, but I spend enough time on social media and watching how people respond to them that a lot of people do have a problem with them. And there might be players who do. There might be players who are like, you know what, I don't even want to take that guy's call. Again, I'm talking about the desirable guys. I'm talking about the guys who are getting multiple offers, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 offers. I could see them being like, no, I'm not, I don't want to listen to them. Mid low level guys, only one or two teams calling, you're going to listen to everybody. And maybe it's not. So I'm not saying that will be an issue. I would think of all the things that will be an issue, the things Aaron Rodgers says when he's not in uniform, I think would be at the bottom of the list. I kind of even regret mentioning that because I don't think it's going to be a huge factor. But the Jets need they need as many factors in their favor as possible. They don't have culture in their favor. They don't have history in their favor. They don't have a lot of cap space. Doesn't work in their favor. They don't have stability. Which, listen, you're a free agent. Whether you're a journeyman or a veteran, if you're not getting an enormous deal, like you're getting a deal that a team can cut you after a year or two, you're like, man, am I really going to go sign with this team where if we don't make the playoffs, everyone's fired and there's a new regime who might not like me and then I'm moving again next year? You know what? Let me go to Cleveland where they have some stability. As crazy as that is to say, right? Let me go to a team where I believe the coach is going to be there for 5 or 6 years or even 3 years. Um, and you just can't say that with the Jets. They're in a really tough spot. But this is it. This is being a Jet fan, folks. I don't know about everybody out there. I've said it a couple times. I'm kind of listen. I'll look by the time training camp rolls around. I'll probably be all fired up again and coming up with the scenarios of how the Jets can make the playoffs and win playoff games and maybe go to the Super Bowl and all this. But it's we know, we know deep down we know that this team you don't have a coach, you don't have an OC. Um, your GM might be, if Tony Pauline is at, I just have a hard time seeing it. I can see Joe Douglas, like I said, I can see him working with his staff and trying to get them what they want. I don't think Joe Douglas is sitting there going, "What do you want, Robert? I'll get you whoever you like." I just don't see that being the case. He doesn't strike me as that type of guy. So we'll see what happens come draft time. What do you do? We've talked about it before. We're going to talk about it again. I still see people. It better not be Brock Bowers. I've moved past the Bowers thing because I don't see him being there. Every mock I've seen over the past few weeks. I think I've seen one where he falls past 7, and in that one he actually fell to 14. But the other 10 mocks above it, 5, 7, 5, 7, 7, 7, 5, 5, 7, 7. Like a lot of people, some of them, you know, blogger sites, whatever, dopey bloggers, right? Um, but a lot of them, sort of credible outlets with former scouts and former GMs and executives who put these things together. And a lot of them don't have Bowers falling to 10. I don't have them falling to 10. And people say anything, oh, they're just going to trade up. The Jets cannot trade up. They are in no position to do that. If I mean that would be a great way for Joe Douglas to get himself fired. If he gives up assets to move up in the draft, he doesn't have the picks to do that. Hitting on UDFA's this year is going to be tough. I don't know if you heard us discuss it or if you heard Jim Nagy, uh, president of the Senior Bowl. He runs the whole thing down in Mobile, does a great job down there. And he's talked about how so few underclassmen are declaring that he's saying rounds 4 through 7 this year. He said expect to see a lot of teams packaging their 5, 6s, and 7s to move up to 3 and 4, round 3, round 4, with multiple 5, 6, and 7s because the talent just isn't there this year. So if you're telling me that teams are scared that they're not going to be able to find a player in the 5th round, what are the odds of them finding UDFA's? Um, so this could be a year where not many teams hit in the UDFA pool. If you listen to me on, I love getting into that sort of those late pick guys, those day 3, those UDFA types. I really enjoy those. Not as many guys have jumped out at me. That Jason Bean I mentioned the other day from Kansas, the quarterback, which I get it. He's an older guy. He's like 26. I knew he was an older guy, but he was even older than I realized when I said that, he should be on the Jets' radar. I mean, maybe as a UDFA, that's it. I don't know if I wouldn't use a pick on a quarterback who's as old as he is, but he does a lot of things well. He's got a good arm, throws with touch and accuracy, knows when to use touch and not light it up and bring out the howitzer. He can run, you see make some big runs for Kansas. So he's a developmental guy, but really if basically it would have to come down to the Jets evaluating him and deciding whether or not being an older guy, spent 6 years in college, did that benefit him to the point where you're like, "All right, this guy will be ready in a year." And I'm not saying he's gonna be a 7th round pick or a UDFA who's gonna be your starter for the next 10 years. I'm just saying developmental quarterback who could be a spot starter backup because they need that. The Jets need a quality backup. And if they believe he could be one starting next year as a UDFA or a day 3 pick, I'm looking at Jason Bean. But there are a lot of quarterbacks in this class who, again, will be day 3 options. Who, Devin Leary out of Kentucky, we've talked about a little bit. Brennan Armstrong out of Virginia and NC State, he transferred. I don't know what to make of him. 3 years ago at Virginia, he looked really, really good. Then 2 years ago, he dipped significantly. But that whole offense, they switched offensive coordinators, they lost some players, and they just fell apart. Actually, in fact, that was what I remember thinking. They actually didn't lose many players. That's why it was concerning. And you kind of look at the OC. You're like, hey man, you have almost the entire crew you had last year that lit up the scoreboard, and now you can't move the ball. So then Armstrong leaves. He goes to NC State, and didn't look great there. So is the real guy the guy who was there 2 years ago, or is the guy who was there, last year, or at NC State last year? So who knows? Like I said, there'll be some day 3 guys to look at every position, and we'll look at as many of them as possible. Draft profiles. We're starting to roll those out now. A lot of work goes into those. We're gonna do as many as we can. Just started putting them up a couple days ago. Started with Talise Fuaga, Oregon State. He seems to be the guy who is most often mocked to the Jets. Rich Cimini of ESPN New York. In case you missed it, he tweeted out during Senior Bowl practices that Fuaga was the apple of Joe Douglas's eye and the buzz in scouting circles. And I like Cimini. I know a lot of people rip Rich Cimini. The he's been doing it forever. And as a pure writer, he's probably the best on the beat. He doesn't he doesn't make a bunch of stuff up. Fans, whenever they don't like what they're hearing, they just say, well, that's made up. Like, well, look, I don't see that from Cimini. When he puts something out that's exclusive, which doesn't happen often, that ain't his fault. Climate's changed, folks. Um, Rappaport and Shefty get all the scoops. But every now and then, when the Jets need a favor, when they have a message that they want the fans to receive, they'll call Cimini and say, hey, man, we're going to give you this scoop. Here's some inside info of what really went down. And Cimini will break it down. He does a nice job. But anyway, I digress. He's the one who said Fuaga was the guy the Jets were targeting, or would be targeting early on. So we put up our draft profile of him the other day. It's on the front page of jetnation.com right now. Also, yesterday we did Peyton Wilson, NC State linebacker, who myself and Dylan Terman had a chance to speak with at the Senior Bowl. Hard guy not to like. Honestly, tough to see him landing with the Jets. And that's the thing about this. The Jets have a handful of picks, 5, 6, and they might make some trades. Maybe they end up with 8 or 9 picks. We're not just going to profile 2 positions. We're not going to say, well, the Jets need a tackle and a receiver, so we're going to profile the 50 tackles and 50 receivers. We're gonna bounce around, and there will be guys who are probably less likely to land with the Jets, but they're just players that we've watched enough of that we're comfortable speaking on, and we enjoy them. How we doing, Wild Wave? You're catching me in the closing minutes here, buddy. Sorry about that. We've wrapped up the incompetence of the Jets and just talking a little bit about draft profiles. As I said, Peyton Wilson, his profile's up right now on the front page. Super athletic guy. I've been watching him. This is my 3rd year watching him. And just you love the motor, you love the energy, you love the just the mindset, the way he attacks ball carriers, bigger off-ball linebacker, but man, can he run. I will be amazed if he's not top 2 or 3 40 time at the combine in Indy. Um, yeah, I'd have a hard I'd be shocked if he's not top 3. And I'd be happy for him if he's won. Seemed like a good guy, worked his way back from some injuries, made a good decision, got serious injury a couple years ago, ACL, I believe, missed the year. And he had some injuries in high school, so teams were a little bit worried. Came back 2 years ago, was fine, played 11, 12 games, and then could have declared for the draft, but I think he was viewed as sort of a day 3 prospect because of the injuries. And he said, "You know what? I'm gonna come back again. I'm gonna play another season of college football. I'm gonna stay healthy again and prove to scouts that I can stay healthy for a couple years in a row." I remember tuning in early in the year and he got hurt in a game. I saw them bringing him off. The trainers were bringing him off, and I thought, "Oh, here we go again." And I think that was it. I think he missed like a couple quarters, and then he was back on the. He played 23 games over the last 2 years, so hopefully he shook the injury bug. Told us in Mobile that's one of the reasons he plays the way he does. The sort of hair on fire mentality comes from having battled the injuries he's battled and appreciating the fact that it can all come to an end at any point. So hopefully Peyton Wilson is a guy who has a long career. Would love to see him with the Jets. Good leader, good player, good athlete. Ton of heart, kind of guy you want on your team. And we're going to be rolling those out. Dylan Terraman's working on one right now. Chris Schubert's working on one right now. And we're going to try to get a few of those out every single week. As I said, there will be guys you'll look at and go, Jets aren't taking him. Right. The Jets aren't taking a lot of people. There's like 600 draft eligible players. The Jets are taking like 7 or 8 of them. So yeah, there will be lots of guys that we profile who the Jets aren't taking, but it's a bit of fun. It's a way for fans who don't have the time that we have to watch college football to be a little bit better informed and kind of learn about these prospects before the draft kicks off, and to do it through a Jets site for Jets fans. So that's it for this one. We'll wrap it up. Tony Pauline says the Jets are dysfunctional, and Johnson's hired their coffee boy to be the team president. Joe Douglas has given up the decisions to Robert Saleh. Never a dull moment with this team. There's always something. There's always a reason to be aggravated, frustrated, wondering what the hell is going on. And that's kind of where we are right now. But 69 days until the NFL draft. I'm looking forward to it. I know you are too. So plenty of draft talk coming up. Free agency before then. And that'll wrap it up for this one, Jets fans. Have a good one.